G'day everyone, welcome to this webinar on organic TikTok marketing for startup founders. I know even though it's been proven so much over the last few years, sometimes when people hear TikTok, they still switch off a little bit. But hopefully after this presentation, you'll understand that it's an extremely powerful tool in your arsenal and one which is only going to get more and more strong for reaching those people who will actually become your potential customers in the future. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Sebastian Camus, the Associate Startup Advisor here at Hyper, and before I came to Hyper, I ran social media and TikTok account for an artist project which I created. With that project, I've seen some pretty huge results with TikTok marketing, with millions of views across multiple videos. But more specifically, what's important is there were videos where I was intentionally trying to build a brand and intentionally trying to sell a product down the line, and got a lot of conversion through that. I tried a lot of different social media marketing campaigns and strategies through the years before that, and none of them compared at all to TikTok. It's not just in the numbers, not just in the metrics, but in the actual engagement of these customers and like the actual relationship which I was able to build and the strength of that, which is the main selling point and the difference which gives me such conviction in this strategy. So yeah, I've conviction that, especially because you're all working on such exciting startups where you have such passion for it, that sort of traction and that sort of relationship is essential, and it will really, really help to get some loyal customers. So let's jump right in. So here's the agenda for today. I'm going to split it into two parts. Firstly, I'll run you through quickly what it is and why you should care for a bit of context. And then after that, we'll jump straight into like how we actually do it, how we go about doing this stuff, how we physically make the content, and what the strategy behind that is. So what is it and why should you care? Basically, TikTok is an absolute goldmine for those potential customers, which I was talking about before. So it's pretty important that you care. Let's jump straight into a quote from me about the way I would phrase social media marketing as the process of building authentic relationships with potential users on a compounding scale. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to the definition. But notice here how I didn't actually mention any videos or articles or podcasts or anything to do with the content. And that's mainly because we're not focusing on the content on the broad scale. The content's just the input. What's important is the output, which is the audience, and that's what compounds over time. Additionally, I didn't mention selling or selling a product at all, because this is more of a marketing strategy. And if we focus too much on sales in this and focus on the short term, it can become detrimental to the strategy on the whole. So it works on a process of give to build authentic relationships, which can then result in real conversion to users. So the theory is the longer the give, the bigger the ask. And that's really important to remember. So the longer the give, the longer you can keep giving of yourself, giving content, forming these relationships, the bigger the ask can be at the end there. Recently, in the last 10 years, it's been on a huge scale. Some examples are celebrities. So, for example, Conor McGregor, he just continually gave in his career, continually gave to the public with his personality, his entertainment, and he comes out with Proper 12, and instantly it's a $600 million business. Similar with The Rock and Terramana Tequila. He continually gave in the entertainment business. People got to know his personality, and then that branding was transferred instantly into his product, Terramana Tequila, which is now worth over $4 billion. So the strategy works really well for B2C. You might have to get a little bit more creative with B2B, but definitely don't switch off, because there are definitely some ways which you can do that. So we'll come back to this definition in a minute. The attention economy is essential to understand if we're going to understand how this works, because understanding the motivations of the companies which we're actually building our fan bases and our audience and our customer base on top of it's the bread and butter, basically. So the fundamental tenet to understand is is to understand who has a vested interest in what. So the platforms that we're on, basically, we got to understand the biggest apps right now are built on attention as a commodity, which is tapped and then sold to advertisers. So the pie is the total number of hours of every single potential customer put together in the world. And these platforms attempt to grab as much of that pie as possible, keep these users on the platform as long as possible. And they use various strategies to do that. But the main one which they're using these days is algorithmically pushed content, which is actually just figuring out what the customer, the viewer, really likes to watch through the rich data which they've developed over the years, and then pushing content which they actually like. Right now, because of TikTok and the way TikTok's been doing it, they actually have become a lot more agnostic with the sort of creators which they push. It doesn't really require to be someone with a huge following already. In the past, it would need, the algorithms would be based on who had shown traction in the past. But now TikTok specifically has revolutionized that in the fact that tiny creators, if they're making incredible content, can still get pushed to huge audiences. And that's essential to understand before we move on. So it's completely within their incentive to push great content if you make great content. It's that simple, honestly. So a bit of branding 101, because that's essentially what we're going to be leveraging here when we're building our relationships with our potential customers. So if we look, basically what we're doing, the strategy is converting your authentic personality and values, which are then transported into the product you sell. So it shouldn't be hard, because you as founders should have such a passion for the product which you're making, and you should really believe in it. And it should also reflect you on a pretty fundamental level as well. So basically, this example from Jordan here and the Jordans, when they came out in '85 from Nike, is Michael Jordan has qualities of victory. He embodies qualities of athleticism, of greatness. And since user A over here doesn't actually feel like they have those qualities, or doesn't feel like they can get them from another source, what Nike does is they take these values from Michael Jordan, which are already in him, they associate it with a product, Air Jordans, and user A can't actually get those things, wants to be like Michael Jordan. Instead of doing all the work to become like, to have those qualities on themselves, they just buy the shoe, and by proxy, they instantly have the values from Michael Jordan. And this is pretty basic stuff. I'm sure it's not new to most of you, but this is exactly what we're leveraging when we are developing our personality online and developing who we are. And then later down the track, we infuse that into the product we have, and instantly people see that product as possessing those values as well. So why should you care? We've just been through what it is. Why should you care? So let's come back to our definition here and look at it on a bit more of a granular scale. So authentic relationships are essential these days, and no other marketing technique builds authentic relationships like social media does, except for maybe in person and word of mouth sort of thing. But that's far less scalable, which we'll come to in a second. Basically, the younger generation and everyone these days is surrounded by marketing, and we're constantly being sold to, and we have an instinct for when we're being sold to. So we instantly switch off. In the case of these videos, we instantly scroll past it and move on, because we're not there to be sold to. We're there to have fun and enjoy ourselves. Basically, if you think when you think TikTok, if you think of high school kids doing little dances, well, that's almost 4 years gone now, and those people are entering the workforce. I'm not saying that's the only people on TikTok, but they're going to be your potential users for the next 10, 20 years, the rest of your startup's life, basically. So basically, building these authentic relationships is how we cut through that noise, how we cut through the noise of constantly being sold to, of billboards everywhere, everything trying to get our attention in this attention economy that I was talking about before. Because your audience feels like they know you, they develop a trust with you, and it's less like you're asking something of them, and more like they want to be part of whatever you're creating and whatever you're doing. So this is also the advantage of using video over text. I haven't actually explained why we'd do that rather than say LinkedIn posts or blog posts of sorts, which you can convey your personality through that, but it's a lot more difficult than if you're actually physically in front of a camera and you're physically talking to someone in a candid mode like this. That's a huge advantage there. Yeah, and video's not going anywhere, so these are essential skills to learn for the next little while until we all plug into the metaverse, and that's it. So next is potential users. So if we do our strategy properly, it allows us to connect with our target customer directly and connect with them deeply on the level which I was talking about before. So that's really valuable. No longer is it just a shotgun approach of trying to get as many people to see what we are doing as possible. We're trying to actually zero in on the user, the profile user, who we like, who we want, and who we're trying to solve their problem for in our startup, and we're trying to connect with them. It's really valuable to be able to do that on social media. And then on a compounding scale. So like I said, we could do a similar thing in person, but it just doesn't compound in the same way. before I mentioned that the content's the input and the audience is the output. That's basically not a linear function. The input is linear. We constantly make one video a day, 2 videos a day. We're constantly putting that out on a linear function. But the output, which is the audience, can compound over time. Every new video can attract a new audience, and those videos stack on top of each other. Your old videos continue to get views, and pending changes in the algorithm can often be pushed out and become viral ages after you've made those videos. So this is essential to understand, because if you're making videos for a year versus reaching out to people individually for a year, you could be reaching an exponentially larger audience of people who actually care about what you're doing than if you were physically just talking to a person on a linear function. So just rounding out the why, because we're still on that. Basically, social media has been around for ages. Why is now the best time to do it? And I kind of touched on that earlier when I talked about the fact that TikTok's algorithm is now pushing content which is not necessarily from huge users, but they're pushing content which is essentially just good for the purpose and is engaging. This means that right now is a great time to jump into it, because algorithms change, but for now at least, this is definitely a great time to get in. It's also easier than ever to create with the tools we have. Every phone, anyone who's got a phone here, I'm going to take a leap of faith and assume that it's good enough to record some content, because TikTok specifically, and we'll get into this later when we talk about how to make stuff and what to make, it's candid, and people like to see uncut, raw footage of you with low production value, because it feels more authentic. It feels more like a person than a full production team who's trying to sell you something. Yeah, and then why TikTok specifically? Mainly because of these couple reasons which I've mentioned, how candid it is and the ability to like push to new audiences even if you don't have an existing audience. But we can definitely repost this content onto Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts, which would definitely recommend. Both of those platforms have different user bases who are there for different reasons. So we would have to optimize our videos and the way we make our videos for each platform. So I would suggest we start by optimizing for TikTok, because it's more transferable to the other ones. But if we start seeing some traction with the other platforms specifically for your user base, because maybe your startup targets a similar audience to say the audience of YouTube Shorts, then we could pivot in that direction. But for now, I believe TikTok's the best place to start. So now, how do we actually do it? Hopefully I've convinced you that we should. So how do we actually do it? Quickly, I'll jump into how do I make the content just physically I've already kind of touched on that, but before we get into what to make, how do I just make it? It's easy. Like I said before, we just need our front-facing camera, maybe sometimes our back-facing camera, maybe a tripod, and maybe a mic down the road if you can get one, but not necessary. All you need is your phone. The beauty of it is people like it to be candid, and people like you to be on camera, and they like to see your face, like I mentioned before. If you don't have interesting surroundings to film, which you might actually, because you're building startups, you're doing interesting stuff in your day-to-day, you're speaking to people, you're going out and about, but if you don't have that, you can use the green screen filter, which is really good on TikTok, which is basically, it's algorithmic. You don't need an actual physical green screen behind you, and you can put photos and sometimes videos behind you while you record yourself talking to the camera or you record something else. And just get started. So we don't need huge production value on these, like I mentioned before, and you'll learn as you go. So if you start using the platform and start seeing what's getting traction, you'll learn and grow, and within like a few weeks, a few months, you'll be a lot more comfortable. It's not difficult to get started, and one of the most awesome parts about it is if your content sucks, which it will at the beginning, no one's going to see it. By nature of the algorithm, it only pushes stuff which is great. So you won't have to worry about feeling embarrassed of all your friends and family seeing stuff which is subpar and is just not your personality, because you'll find your voice, and when you do, they will see it. So, what do I make? We know how to make it. We know why we should make it. What do I make? So it's 2023, so I've asked my friend here, ChatGPT, to come up with a startup idea so we can go through an actual example rather than just talking about it. So for the purpose of scalability, here it's given me a virtual home improvement consultation service, but for the purpose of scalability, let's let's assume this isn't actually a physical consultation thing, but it's more just an app which utilizes AR, maybe has a store, but basically helps people improve their homes and gives suggestions. So what I would call this first phase when you're making stuff is your exploration phase. So you understand your startup. In our case, it's the home improvement app. Don't reinvent the wheel. Find 10 successful accounts who are servicing a similar market to you and try their format. Not just the formats that go all right for them, but actually scroll to the bottom of their profile like I've done here and look at their videos and find their breakout hits, the ones which got them huge traction and the ones which then built their account following, and copy those ones. Actually, this isn't legal advice, but but basically what I've done is scroll to the bottom and found her everything before this was getting maybe 10K, 20K, some getting 100K, but then I got one video with 1.5 million views. Bang, that's her breakout one. And her content after that was a lot more like that content. So in this example, her breakout content there was basically in a problem solution format. So it was, and it didn't actually have her talking, which is interesting, but I obviously recommend you talk. But it goes, do you have a blank wall? And then it like pans a shot of her blank wall. And then she goes, try these few things, like add a mirror here, do this here, do this here. So that's a format which you can try. And that falls within the educational kind of vein, which I would probably recommend is an easy one to jump off with. So yeah, that's the example there. What we would do is we'd go find 9 other accounts, 20 other accounts, and do the exact same thing. And then we've got a list of 10 or 20 different content types which are proven to work for your target audience. And then we can jump off with those. Then we want to make heaps of content using all those types and see what works, basically. See what actually jumps off and gets some traction. And I'm not talking about, say, you've got videos that are getting 100 views, 1,000 views, and then one gets 10K. It's like, no, we're looking for the big hits. TikTok's all about like all or nothing, basically. You can get stuff which does absolutely nothing, and then the algorithm finds one which heaps of people like, and they send it. So you're going to want to look for that video which gets you that 100,000, that gets you that million, and then you iterate on that. But we'll get into that in a sec. So some broad content formats which we can deal with, just as jumping off points, are ones which tend to work on TikTok specifically, are educational. So just telling people how to do stuff within your niche. People like to scroll and learn small things like this. Comedy, putting your own spin on stuff. Relatable things, so maybe a pain point, you could relate to the pain points of your customer. Satisfying things, so if you've got something visually satisfying, but that's a bit more difficult because it requires slightly higher production value sometimes. And then interesting and shocking things. So those are just a few to jump off with, but definitely play towards your strengths and the strengths of your startup and the values of it. Try each of them if you're not sure which will work. So now we're into the iteration phase. We've found our videos, we've found the content that works, and we've made lots of different pieces of content based on what already works in the target market. One of them's worked, say the one that we just, in our example, used, and it got maybe 500,000 views, and it built our follower count by, let's say, 500 or 1,000 followers or something like that. Iterate. You found a format that works, rinse and repeat. Don't worry about getting repetitive in this initial phase. That will become clear when it's becoming too repetitive. But people on TikTok like repetition. So if you've got this thing which works, do you have a blank wall? Try these solutions, that format with that text, say, and that type of that music in the background and those camera angles. Do the exact same thing, but in slightly different changes. So here I've got iteration could be blank coffee table, try these solutions. Maybe put this here, put this here. Cluttered kitchen, try these solutions. Organize these things, get these organized products. Uninspiring desk, try these solutions. Maybe get a plan to do that. Short, to the point, pretty much exactly like the initial one which worked, and then we just continue and we pump it out. We can keep going until it clearly becomes dry, and you'll get a sense for when it becomes dry, and then you switch it up. Then you go back to exploration and find heaps more content, and then you try that out, and then you find another one which works and you jump off that. Sometimes this stuff is difficult because it could take 10 posts before you see a jump off hit. It could take 100, it could take 1,000, but you just need to stick at it, and you need to make sure that the content you're making is still in the same vein as what is actually appropriate on the platform, because too often, if people aren't actually on the platform and aren't experiencing what stuff is like, they aren't picking up on the nuances, which are physically what the video should feel like and what they should be like. And those things are difficult to describe. You just kind of have to watch and experience. Cool. So now you've iterated, you've explored, you've iterated, and now you've got an audience. Say you've got 10,000 followers, maybe you've got 100,000 followers, and they're actually engaged in the comments because you're doing the same thing. They're coming back for the same thing. They're interested, and most importantly, this audience is an audience who actually cares about the stuff which your startup is servicing. So they will be experiencing the same pain points. If you've done this all correctly, you should have, like, the next part should be easy. The monetizing, it should be easy, and moving them into actual customers shouldn't be too hard because your audience is already aware of the problems, is already aware of, like, already has these problems, and all they need to do is be slowly pushed into the product and just given them the chance to experience what you've made. So you can start leveraging the relationship you've built by integrating stuff into your everyday content. For example, in our example, maybe every 10 posts, we could do the same format, but go, for example, bare wall, pull out your phone and try my app, use like the AR and show it on screen to get some suggestions on how to decorate it. I made this app to make home improvement easier. Simple. You're not selling, you're not telling them, come buy this thing. You're not doing any of that. What you're actually doing is just integrating stuff into your content and gradually making them aware of something you're doing. It's often good here to disclose that this is your product, that you do make money off this because authenticity is essential. Yeah, and we want to make sure that we're not doing this too often. We need to be careful with this because if you've done all the previous stuff, you'll know that building trust and building this audience takes time and it's not particularly easy. So trust takes a while to build and it's pretty quick to break. If you start asking too frequently or in bad taste, you'll alienate your audience and undo all that hard work. So we've got to make sure that it's gradual and it's very authentic and it's on brand and you're just communicating to these people who you actually care about that you've got a solution which you actually think could help them. And that shouldn't be particularly hard because that's why you're building this startup to begin with, because you want to help these people and solve their problems. Finally, basically that's the strategy really. We're just building an online presence and building our brand. We're translating those values from ourselves, from that personality that we've developed through talking to the camera and engaging in the comments with our users. And we're transferring it then to the startup, the product which we later give them. You can employ other sales techniques later on if you feel the need, but again, be careful with this. So there are also alternative strategies to using social media. I'm not going to pretend that this is the only way to do it, even though I believe it's the strongest and the most intelligent way to do it. But there are some alternatives. For example, you can do sponsored posts with influencers where you get an influencer to use your brand or use your product and actually inherit the characteristics in their brand into your service. So you'd obviously want to make sure that it's applicable and their audience is applicable to the potential audience you're looking to service. That can be useful. You can also make a repost channel where, for example, if your startup involved a consultation service or a booking service which used a lot of other services under one umbrella, you could then repost their content and get access to an audience by reusing their content and getting access to their audience. The issue with some of these approaches is you don't actually own the audience. They're not your audience. They're not there with you. They're not on the ride with you. And you don't control the content so much as you would if you're actually making it yourself. For these reasons, I wouldn't, I'd try this initial tactic first, but I can understand for some people who don't feel comfortable making the content or don't have the time, there are some alternatives. But I wouldn't just try this because it's easier, because it's far less beneficial in the long term, in my opinion. Also, some mistakes. Thinking you can be impersonal. So people feel like they can do this entire strategy, but not show their face or not actually talk to their customers and their audience in the comments, thinking that they can not put their personality into it and just be dry because it's easier. But they followed every other step, so it should work, right? No, this is essential to build the relationship with your audience and to actually to tell them who you are and to help them understand a bit about you and about your branding. It's essential. People, you can't skip this step. Constantly selling. People want to view content when they're on a platform. They want to enjoy themselves, or they're just there to pass some time. They don't constantly want to be sold to. So as soon as you start doing this, you'll stop getting views, and the algorithm will stop pushing your content, and B, people will just scroll and they will stop listening to you, and maybe they'll even unfollow. 3 is lacking consistency. This is a long game. This process takes time, and you need to be consistent. In terms of time, amount of posting, on TikTok, it varies. The algorithm changes over time, but once a day is a great thing to go by. Sometimes in the past, people have talked about 3 times a day. That can work. It really depends on your content and how fast you can pump it out, while still retaining a decent level of quality. But whatever you figure out works for you and works for your content, you need to stick with it. And you need to be constant, and you can't skip days, you can't skip weeks, even if you decide to do once a week and do a great post. 4th one's making excellent videos. So it may sound counterintuitive here, but I'm not actually talking about in terms of ideation and thought and strategy behind the actual videos. I'm talking about production value. You can sink so much time into getting the perfect camera angle, getting the perfect shot, doing the perfect take, all of these things, and get 0 views, and no one cares. And you've wasted all your time when you could have just spent it making 5 posts, taking 5 shots at it, and seeing it as a numbers game. So we don't want to spend too much time on every single video, especially because they're short form and easy to create videos. And then 5th and final is not being on the platform. This isn't an exhaustive list, obviously. There are some more mistakes, but these are some ones which come to mind instantly. Not being on the platform. I mentioned it a bit earlier, but if you're not actually on TikTok and you don't know what sort of content resonates and all the nuances which make something good and engaging, you're not going to understand why your stuff isn't working if it's not working. And these can be gaping holes in your content that you just aren't aware of. So that's about it. Hopefully some of you can try out this stuff and see some excellent success and build some relationships with your audiences and build some customers and essentially build a huge customer base. Ovira is an example which I use all the time, of a startup in Sydney who basically built like a huge following on TikTok, and that just really rocketed their startup up. So I definitely recommend checking them out and seeing what they've done. Also, Alex Hormozi on YouTube. His content is excellent, and he's practicing what he's preaching, basically, and makes some excellent business advice for using techniques like this, playing the long game. But otherwise, doing your own personal research and being on the platform, like I said, is the best way to do it. And just get started. You'll figure it out, and you'll learn a lot as you go. And I'm sure you're all quite used to just jumping straight in as startup founders. So I hope you can take something valuable away from this presentation, and I appreciate your time.